Hello and welcome to our Pioneers in Action interview series. I'm Bea Heller, co-founder of The Pioneers. We provide people products and support for startups, scale-ups and small businesses who want to create a culture they can be proud of. This series is all about the challenges faced by people and culture leaders in growing businesses, how they've approached them, the lessons they've learned along the way, and their top tips for others who are grappling with similar issues in similar situations. In today's episode, I'm talking to Laura Smith, Chief People Officer at Trade Ledger. Trade Ledger have been on quite a journey in the last 18 months, and Laura generously shares her story, highlighting what she would do differently if she had her time again, and celebrating all the ways they're now flourishing, having refocused on what really matters when it comes to people and culture. I hope you enjoy and take a lot from our conversation. So Laura, I think a really good place to start this conversation would be, can you just introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the Chief People Officer at Trade Ledger. Prior to this, I used to work at Equifax, so more in the corporate world as a business partner, and moved into my first head of people role when I first joined Trade Ledger, which was around 15, 20 people globally. Been with them since we've scaled up and made changes to the team. My main responsibility at Trade Ledger was setting that kind of full foundation and putting in the people strategy for their global business.
What tempted you out of big corporate and into Trade Ledger? Cast your mind back 3 years ago. Why did you join Trade Ledger and take up the opportunity for this role?
Yeah, I've always been really passionate about kind of HR people things, whether that's around developing careers or really thinking about how you can maximize and utilize the most out of the talent that you have within the organization. But one thing that I find really archaic about HR is like the policies, the procedures, the fact we just do things because it's how things are done here, and you have this real like historic processes over your head that really in large corporates at times you're more of like an executor and you're kind of just doing things that's been part of the DNA of the organization for so many years. And I was looking for somewhere where rather than doing things because a textbook tells us we should do that or because it's been like that for years, really finding an environment that wanted a bit of a fresh face of HR. And saying that, I don't think anyone actually uses the term HR anymore because that feels really archaic now. But finding an environment where they kind of empowered and gave me the freedom to set up processes that were more reflective of the outcomes we wanted to get in that new environment, and really look at it with a fresh blank sheet of paper and build an exciting human way. And that kind of brought me into startups and especially Trade Ledger. And our founder Martin was really looking for that too. So it seemed to just click with like the values, what I was trying to look for in a business, but especially giving me that freedom in a new environment to really put our own stamp on what HR and people could look like. So that was the pull, I suppose, from corporate into startup for me.
Yeah. I can empathise a lot with that perspective too. I think startups are showing the way in some respects of what people and culture can be in business. So, okay, so with that in mind, can you just maybe give me a bit of an overview? I know it's been a pretty intense time at Trade Ledger for the last couple of years. Could you just walk me through the timeline of that? What's been happening for you? And then we'll dive into some of the challenges and successes that you've had in that time as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I said, when I first joined, I joined around 50 when the business was about 15, 20 people in total, which arguably is quite early for someone like me and in this role to join. But I think that was a reflection of how important the founders felt about getting people and culture right. And they know they was heading into their Series A fundraising round, which was going to come a few months after I joined. So really getting someone in ahead of that curve to lay the foundation before we scale really quickly was really important to them. And hopefully it proved a success, the right decision to make at that time. So when I joined, as I mentioned, it's probably about 4 or 5 months after I joined, we closed our Series A. We then scaled from that point all the way up to, from around about 30, 40 by the time we officially closed our Series A, all the way up to about the 150 mark within around 2 years that was. So real kind of fast growth. We did that all internally. So my main objective at that period of time was build, again, lay the foundation, but also build an internal TA team where we can scale at that pace and that speed, whilst also keeping a handle on costs and thinking about how we're going to make that happen. So everything was about growth. We established the EVP. We looked at kind of the whole people operations. We looked at onboarding. Once we've got the people, how do we get them aligned, get them on board as quickly? How do we retain them, recognize them? So it was really the full spectrum through hyper growth phase. And then earlier this year, in 2022, we were then heavily influenced, I suppose, by how the market conditions changed, especially around the challenges it was with startups getting new fundraising, which a lot of organizations are feeling that pinch point at the moment. VCs really slowing down, money that they're issuing, fundraising rounds, and we found ourselves in a challenging spot financially. And at that point, we had to then let go and reshape the business. And we scaled it right back to about the 50, 60 person headcount size. And really, the decision was made at that point to do it, I suppose, a bit more kind of ahead of the curve, knowing the market was changing, those conditions were coming, but wanting to be more sustainable as well. Previously, I think there was a mindset, and not necessarily this was only Trade Ledger, but it definitely felt like that out there, that startups would get trigger happy, you spend all this money, you read about it online all the time, and then when we run out of money, we'll just go raise more money, and you'll be backed by different fundraisers or VCs. And there's definitely, I suppose, a trend, and you see a lot of startups getting trigger happy and running out of money. And because the market conditions have changed, we made the decision to make some of those changes, reshape the team and size, so we are more sustainable and we can become a business that kind of reaches that point where we are break even and we can cover our own cost and really link more headcount to revenue moving forward. So we went through a really challenging time earlier in the year when we let all those people go. And now we're a much smaller, tighter core team, really back to where we were about 2 years from a headcount size perspective, but arguably probably stronger than ever before, because there are lots of challenges that come with scaling really, really quick, which I'm sure we'll come on to talk about. So really now the focus is all about how are we readapting to go back to a kind of smaller size organization? How are we undoing a lot of that complexity and over engineering that we've probably done in the last few years? How do we get back to the core of keeping things simple, keeping that pace up and getting everyone back on track to where we need to be? So I've really probably done the full roller coaster of the growth and the downsides here at Trade Ledger, to where we are again now. So at the moment we are actually, like I said, really kind of strong financially again. Now we've got that back on track, which is great, and closing new clients and logos, which is something to celebrate about. So it's been a tough year, but yeah, we're ending it in quite a good space.
I can just imagine how tough some of those times have been, but good to hear that it's kind of back in a strong footing and in control of your own destiny. It sounds like a bit more now.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is nice. So just reflecting on the last 2 years then, what's been the most surprising aspect of that time, particularly from people and culture? What surprised you most?
I'd definitely say, whether this, not just related to people and culture, but the pace of how fast things can change. I knew this coming into Trade Ledger, that the pace in the startup world is night and day to corporates. So, one really tangible example of that is you'll walk into a corporate and they've got 3 to 5 year plans and playbooks and your 100-page PowerPoints, and it kind of articulates out what we're going to be doing over the next 3 years. And, yes, there's changes, but it doesn't vary too much from that. Whereas startup, you're planning on more of a quarterly, 6-monthly basis. And even when you get to the end of the quarter, things have chopped and changed. So I knew that coming in. And that was quite firstly, my own personality probably lends itself much better to that. But that was a shock for me in a kind of work context. But even knowing that, the amount of change, how quickly things change over the last 2 years was still a surprise to me. So 1 month you could be growing and having this narrative about wanting to double and triple your headcount size, and then 2 months later things change and you're very quickly looking at things very different, having to make very quick decisions with the leadership team and having to really navigate that change. That's been, I suppose, one of the biggest surprises, really how quick things do change. But most importantly, how are you preparing people for that change? How are you hiring people to make sure that you're hiring people with the capabilities, skill sets, or personality, so to speak, that can handle that change and can still come along that journey with you. I think that's probably one thing that we underestimated, that actually that should really be a core part of who you are hiring and why, because that is a reality. And I don't think it'll ever stop being a reality in startup world, especially at Trade Ledger. So going backwards, I'd probably prioritize that change management piece a little bit more in what we're doing, what I'm doing, what the manager's doing, but also who we're hiring, to make sure they prepare for that, because I underestimated how much that would be a part of day-to-day life at Trade Ledger. It's fun, it keeps things exciting, but does bring its challenges.
And are there things that you now do where, I don't know, you look for those particular attributes when you're recruiting people, and how do you do that? And is there training or support or any other approaches, just talking about it within the business, that is setting you up to be better equipped from a change management perspective going forward? Can you share any of those?
Yeah, definitely. There's a few that we've done. So if I talk about recruitment, so we now bring in more of our values-based interviews. So before, you maybe test for that in one or two questions in the interview process, but we have a separate stage of the process now where you'll have like a technical assessment, and then you'll have a very clear kind of values-based interview, which, you know, a lot of organizations do, but, you know, naturally the power in that is what values and behaviors you're testing it against. You know, again, it can be a bit of a buzzword of like a culture interview or values interview. It's like, yes, anyone can do them, but are you really testing against core behaviors that aren't too woolly around what you're actually trying to articulate here when you're assessing that person? And we have some of those weaved within our values. So we train people up internally to be able to conduct those value-based interviews, and that's one clear stage of the process. And if someone doesn't pass that, whether they're technically superstars or not, they're not going to fit and work out at Trade Ledger. Another key learning I'd definitely say is, at the beginning we had quite a lot of green managers and leaders, because naturally in startups, when you evolve from 10 people sat around a desk and then you start adding in layers, people who don't want to be managers or have never been managers before, tomorrow, like your most senior leaders, it naturally happens overnight, and you sit there and go, how did we get to this point? But actually what you probably really want to prioritize and make sure you do invest in is your manager capability. Again, a real kind of buzzword that you hear a lot about, but it's around not only the training, but the types of individuals you've got in there. And if you can attract it and afford it, you definitely benefit from people who have been through this before, because it's really challenging and difficult for managers that have never been a manager before to go through such a fast-paced, challenging environment themselves, and then you have to lead your team to come through that too. And you kind of need people that have kind of got those war scars, that have been through it before, that can, you know, calm the team, like let people know this is normal. Lots of startups go through it, and they can really be that leader and that kind of that voice in the room that's going to influence and bring that team along. We, again, probably didn't prioritize that. And as you're going through some of these kind of changes, it's quite difficult to then make sure, you know, the team's okay, when you've then got to make sure you're holding the manager's hands too. And you really do need probably that really strong bench strength in your leadership team as you're going through it. So hire first with the right leaders, hire around them. They can really build the team that they know is right and bring them through it. We really started with lots of individual contributors and just kind of evolved a management structure over time. And I would do that the other way around if I was going through it again.
I think it's interesting listening to you and also reflecting on something you said earlier, which is you spent a lot of time getting the structures and the processes in place. And listening to that, I think there's a limitation on what the structure can do if the capability of the managers isn't there. And I don't know, would you agree? And how would you sort of think through some of the steps, some of the things that you did focus on in terms of the people processes, where you might have invested your time if you had your time again?
Yeah, it's such a good point. So I would focus on outcomes. Like, what outcomes are you actually trying to get here? What do you want the manager to, or the team to look, see, feel like? And really the outcomes of that is really the starting point. And if you have the right managers with the right capabilities, they will get you to that naturally. They will help evolve that, whether the process is there or not. So a real example of what I'm trying to articulate here to bring it to life is goal setting. So really what you want people to do is be aligned on outcomes. You want to really kind of hold the bar high. You want to push performance. You want to push people to deliver results. And I saw that and went, okay, I'm going to go launch a performance management tool. And I didn't have the capabilities and the managers to be able to use the tool effectively or drive that conversation with their teams. So what we end up with is a tool that's not really utilized or maximized, or you don't have the engagement there. And I think I've seen a lot of people do that. And actually then the head of people role, whatever your title is, then becomes how do I get people to use the tool rather than how am I actually getting people to drive the conversations that are the valuable, meaningful ones, that really where the power is. So now we capture our quarterly goals on a Google Doc, super simple, no system, really no tools around it. We do it on a quarterly basis. We get our managers together. They align what the team goals are, and after they go and have a conversation with their teams to map out their individual goals, and they'll capture that on a compliments page. Minimal cost, no overhead to process, but that's because we focus more on how do I work with you as a manager for you to be able to facilitate that conversation around alignment of performance and goals really effectively? Like, what are the questions that you should ask? How do you capture that? How do you push people out their comfort zones and really try and get them to that next step? So we've invested our time now on the conversation rather than the process. So that's just one specific example of exactly, what we're articulating here, that when you shift your mindset, it's not all about the process. It's really taking a step back and looking at, what you're actually trying to achieve here and what's actually going to really move the dial on what you're trying to get.
Yeah, and a good, capable manager will adopt the process that works for them and their team. And you can actually have, particularly at the size that you are now, you can support quite a lot of variance in that if you're still getting the outcomes that you need. Really interesting. Okay, so we've reflected a bit on what surprised you. What have been the biggest challenges during the last 2 years? And I imagine downsizing is not a fun experience to go through either. But biggest people and culture challenges in the last couple of years.
Yeah, one thing that has always been a challenge, and I still don't think we get it right, we're not perfect anywhere, but is internal comms. I feel like internal comms is the unloved child at times. That, in day-to-day life, work experience, personal life, like everything comes back to communication. And I feel like that's one thing that really gets left off the agenda. And when I look back, that's one thing that I think would have really helped us through all of these different phases of the business. When you grow really quickly, again, you can underestimate how difficult the flow of comms becomes when you add people in. So we went from 20-person company, you could say something to one person in an office and the whole company knows because there's like 20 people sat all around one table. And then when you start adding different time zones and lots of different voices, it can slow you down and impact productivity if you haven't got the internal comms right. So what direction are we going to it in? Why are we hiring this new person? Why are we just launching this new process? Like, it very quickly became unclear to people at times, kind of the direction we are going in or what are our priorities. And that was really interesting to me, especially when we're downsizing, not getting that comms right again it can be really difficult so people understand the why and don't just see the what is happening. And it helps to build trust and transparency. So I think that's a challenge. Again, just like the capability of being able to do internal comms well or having the resource and capacity to do that. But that's something that I think could be a great opportunity for businesses going through this. One way I'd love to look at it, which we haven't got this completely right yet, but is more around kind of campaign management. Like, let's not see internal comms as, just sending out messages of what's happening that day. Like, I would love to see internal comms of what's the big rock that's happening this month that everyone needs to be aware about. Let's focus all of our channels on that effort. Let's get everyone aligned on this. Let's understand, let's think about what we want people to know at the end of this campaign. And then you can switch and keep running to different campaigns, whatever's relevant to the business at that time or what's happening, and getting a more structured view. I think internal comms can be very scrappy and it just feels really unclear and confusing for people. So really like shifting it to more see it as like marketing to your internal audience. The same as you'd market to your clients. I don't understand why we don't see it in that way, but internal comms very quickly becomes an email or a Slack message. It's actually you're marketing to one of your most important stakeholders here, and really investment in that, I think, is one biggest challenge. Again, we haven't got it completely right, but I do truly believe that internal comms is the way to unlock a lot of the things that people struggle with, alignment, trust, that culture, collaboration. It unlocks productivity. There's a lot of things that you can benefit from getting that right.
I totally agree. And I think one of the challenges with internal comms is we all, human beings, are predisposed to assume that what's in our own heads is likely to be in other people's. More of it is in other people's heads than it is in reality. And so you're always fighting against, I've told them this already before, they're bored of me. I want to keep repeating myself. And actually, literally until you are really bored of that message yourself, that's probably still too early to be repeating it to other people. So I really like that idea of campaign management in terms of just being really, really clear on what the one core message is that you want to get across, probably only in the next month, as you say, because stuff changes so fast. And then finding as many different ways of repeating it without repeating it in exactly the same way, the different channels that you can get it through, or the different the different messages that it needs to be weaved into, so that one message has landed at the end of a month. Really smart way of looking at it.
And especially like communicating, when things are good and bad, because also like a lot of companies shy away from saying, when things maybe are off track and why. And again, like, I've seen it firsthand. Actually, it's really beneficial to talk about the tough times as well as the good times, because you build that kind of goodwill and relationship up that then the people know, they'll communicate to me when it's bad, because they usually do. And if you don't communicate it, the team will make up their own stories anyway, and it will be much worse reality than it actually is. That's always the case. It's a balanced view as well in internal comms. It's not just, with the rose tinted glasses on. It's a real true reflection of, I suppose, and how you can connect with the team.
Yeah. And big businesses have whole comms teams for a reason, Small companies don't. And that, I think, it is like this unloved child, it falls between the gaps of all the departments. And we always talk about being good storytelling leaders, but who's helping leaders to do that? Who's constructing the campaigns? Where does responsibility lie? I just think those are really tough questions, but important that it's on the table so it doesn't get completely forgotten.
Yeah, absolutely.
Go back to sort of earlier this year, and obviously you've downsized, and then you're starting to look to rebuild. And sounds like you're in a really positive place now. What did you see as you were looking to build up the business again and get back into a positive place? Did you see that there was a real opportunity around people and culture at Trade Ledger to kind of do things differently, maybe try and create a different kind of culture? How was that experience? What was the opportunity as you saw it to kind of rebuild the team?
So there's a couple of things really. I think probably two really stands out to me. One was around how we joined the dots closer between financially and the kind of people side. So I myself, I think I operate with quite a commercial mindset, but you can very quickly, when you've got finance teams around you and other roles, kind of decouple a bit of that responsibility of, you manage the finances, I manage the people, like give me a green light and I'll go run and hire all these people. When actually I think for head of people or similar roles, there's a real opportunity for you there to get, to make sure that kind of process of approving roles or really understanding where you want to make investment. This isn't just about headcount. I see, all of this around investment in tools or systems or, people, training, learning, whatever it is, but you really get closer to the finances of what is the return on investment we're going to make here? Why have we made the decision to invest in here? Really challenging your leaders that I know every leader probably wants all this cash to do all these great things, but it isn't just a finance person that should be holding the line on the numbers. I think really there's an opportunity to bring the head of people voice into that, to make sure that we are spending in the right way and we are becoming more sustainable. And I think you can very easily get trigger happy when you've gone through a fundraising round, but I think there's a real opportunity to create some process practices that bring those two voices closer together and aligned. So when we grow in the right way again, that we make sure that we, I suppose, have a foundation in place for us to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. The other point is definitely around culture. So, as you grow really quickly, it is really hard to keep the culture that you imagining and you wanted to build intact, and you're shaping it in the right way. Like every hire you make, I do fundamentally believe, it brings another voice, another personality. It's an opportunity to go and reshape the culture. And we had values previously, but we grew so quick and we didn't keep them alive enough that they probably very fast became words on a page. And when we then went to restructure the business, we actually launched at the same time refreshed new company values. And that's because we were recognizing that we are going to change the look and feel of this business. This is going to be a different phase of the business, and it does require a bit of a different culture. So, for example, previously it might have been more about, when we're growing quickly, about managing more kind of in larger teams or around process, or having less of a risk appetite anymore because we're growing bigger and things should be settling down a bit more stable. Whereas we're moving to a culture now where people need to, again, have a higher risk appetite and kind of roll your sleeves up and get into the weeds and get a little bit dirty with it, and having to, create new processes. And we had to shift that behavior back to where we needed it to be. And we launched that at the same time of restructuring with that in mind. We had built a whole new behavioral framework. So that was a real opportunity to reset that. And I think we did a really, really good job. And actually the culture, again, has probably not been stronger than it ever has before now, because we took the opportunity to really think what's right for the business today, not just what are the good people behaviors that it sounds great for us to have. Yeah. And it's going to be a good marketing tool. It's like, no, let's get really serious about what does this mean? Like, what behaviors do we need to carry us through this next phase of the business? And again, I'm not saying just developing those values makes all the culture change overnight. But I think what was the biggest game changer is we got people talking about them. We got people thinking about them and reflecting. And we had lots of conversations with our leaders about our values, saying like, are these the right ones? Are these not? Why? Why should we drop this behavior? Why should we introduce this? And again, I go back to what I said earlier, the power in all of this is the conversations, I believe, rather than the policy or the things you actually end up with. It's like just getting people talking about, who do we want to be? What do we want to be known as? And doing that exercise at the same time as a restructure, so we could make decisions off the back of that as well, of, how we're going to restructure the teams. And I think it was really powerful. And it's resulted what the result was, we've ended up with a very small, tighter core team that do believe in our values now and reflect it. And, the leaders are leading with that in mind as well now. So that was definitely an opportunity coming out of the change that we was able to put in place, I think, at the right time. And again, timing is everything for these types of things. But that was a good point in time to really refresh the values.
I think listening to you, thing for me as well is also the connection with the first thing you said, which is being really commercially minded and thinking about the sustainability of the business. The fact that connection between the people team and I'm sure other departments within Trade Ledger as well, that's got so much tighter. It makes the values that much more meaningful. It's like, these are the values we need to be a successful business, not to be a nice place to work. Do you know, like that's, and I think it's always really challenging. You cannot talk about values in isolation of having a successful business if you actually want them to stick, because it forces people to think, why do we have these? It's not because we just want to be nice people, we want to be a nice place. No, this is going to make our business more successful. And that generates for you then particularly the type of values that you have, i.e., and the types of behaviours that are important to Trade Ledger through this phase of your growth. And making that connection so explicit and actually talking about that, it makes everything more real for people, and then people are owning the risk themselves as well. It's like, no, I recognise I'm stepping into a riskier business that's in more of a startup phase where there isn't, money is tighter and it's not really, there's not this kind of narrative, oh, we're always going to have money around and it's easy to get funding, and it's like, I think that's as soon as it's real for people, that's when the values do mean something.
Absolutely. And one biggest tip I would say, if anyone's listening to this and thinking about refreshing their values, is to separate behaviors, and they are really kind of at times aspirational behaviors, with ground rules, as we call them at Trade Ledger, because we had things like fail fast. We start simple in our aspirational behaviors, that we're not perfect, but that's where we want to get to. That's our North Star. That's the sort of culture that we want to be shaping here. But in our ground rules, we have things like treat people with respect. We leave egos at the door. Because these are more like non-negotiables. Like, if people break the ground rules, you're not welcome here at Trade Ledger, and a lot of organizations would feel like that. I don't see them as like big behavioral values, and I think people mix up the two. I think separating them gives people a lot more clearer direction to say, like, these are ones that we're starting from day one now. Call them out if you see them, and let's address. Behaviors are much more, to me, a bit more longer term. Like, we're getting there. Like, help us. We might fall in places, we might make mistakes, but let's all do our best to try and get to these behaviors, because it's going to shape our culture one day. And I think decoupling the two helps people understand their values more, rather than looking at sometimes and go, well, we're not really doing that yet, so why should I take these seriously? You're saying that, I think that really helped me turn a corner with values and like fall in love with them again, because I could relate to them more as a human. So that would be my top tip if anyone's going through that process.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think just to build on that, there's something that's you have to be able, some of what you're talking about has to be reflected in the present day. Like, it can't all be aspirational, or it feels too disconnected from day-to-day experiences. And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. Ground rules and our aspirational behaviours. Ground rules you should see every day, or if they're being broken, they should be being called out when they are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So biggest successes or wins during this time, or your whole time at Trade Ledger, what would you say has been the this has had a big impact, and I feel like it's really contributed to the culture at Trade Ledger?
Yeah, there's just so much stuff at different phases that we've been through.
A few highlights.
A few highlights. I would say, and I don't want this to sound like a generic one that everyone would say, but I think we've done a really, really good job at finding people that fit our culture at Trade Ledger and do have those core right behaviours. Like, we have managed to do that really well with a strong core team. And the reason why I sit back and go, I think that's a big success, because we've been through so many different phases of the business within 2 years. The resilience of this team and the commitment and the loyalty is so impressive to see, and you feel so comforted to know that we've got a team like this around us. I think a lot of businesses say, it feels like a family unit here, and you kind of get mocked a little bit for saying that. But at times when it's really, really tough, the way that people pull together because they really care about making Trade Ledger a success. This isn't just a job to most people. Like, we're emotionally connected to this business, and making it everything that it can be in the future. And I think that is one success and highlight, if we reflect back, that it is the people and the way that we've recruited people into the organization and the way that we've done that. Because in a lot of environments, perhaps going through, the good time is great, but the bad times, people very quickly could have left and found other roles in other organizations. And don't get me wrong, that happened a little bit. Of course it did, through all the changes, but there is a really good, strong core team that are really high performing that we are very lucky to have. So I think the resilience of the team and the way that we've built those behaviours, is so rewarding to see. And a lot of that is to do, with the values that we've built here and the culture and how we've recruited them into the team. So it definitely has to be one of the highlights. And I think I've felt that mostly in the last few months of being here. It's just a great team to be around. Like, they uplift everyone. We push each other to our boundaries. We make each other step out of our comfort zones. We launched a women's network the other day that's just about being really vulnerable in there and bringing the best out of that group. And I just, I sit there sometimes and reflect and say it's just a really great place to be, that you've got people that really care about each other as much as we do. And we're not a small team now, but we've still held on to that, which is great to see.
Yeah, that's really nice. And so what are you focused on right now? What's occupying your thoughts as head of people and culture at Trade Ledger?
Yeah, so a lot of different things. I think the main one is really, as we continue to look to stabilise the team, settle the change, that really getting back to how are we looking at engagement and retention across the team. So there's 2 key initiatives we're rolling out just at the moment, this week actually, as we speak, which kind of link together. But one is we're rolling out a brand new feedback tool that's integrated with Slack, and they do like company pulse. So rather than sending kind of one big survey at a moment in time that we did previously, they drip feed 4 questions per week, random 4 questions that contribute to the engagement dashboard. So it's a live, continuous way to obtain current data and metrics from the team. And again, we've adapted that model because of like the change in size of the team, but also how fast and how quick we're moving. We recognize that we need a tool and processes that enables us to get that voice from our people on a more regular basis, to make sure that we are staying on top and being a bit more proactive with any areas of concerns we need to tackle, but also celebrating what we're doing really well. So that's one initiative we're on at the moment, which will in turn obviously contribute to that engagement and retention, because we can surface those motivators or demotivators quite quickly in the moment. The other one coupled to that is introducing wellness days to the business. So I've seen a few other companies do this too, but this is paid time off to give back to the people just so that they can recharge themselves. Well-being and health means different things to different people. So whether that's you're sat on your sofa all day binging Netflix, that you're using it to go out for a run, you want to see your family and friends, whatever it is, again, we recognize that at times it can be a really high-pressured environment at Trade Ledger. And we want to start giving that back to people. It's not just about burning people out. It's, how can we make sure that you take care of yourself as, human as well, and feel recharged, ready to go again. So we're trying to weave in different ways for us to, identify when there's maybe higher levels of stress in the team, or whether, there might be a bit of fatigue, where we can then introduce different initiatives like wellness days, could we give people time back, so they go hand in hand, those 2 initiatives. But this is all about, again, really thinking about what type of business are we, what does it feel like to work here at Trade Ledger, and what is the culture like, and then what initiatives can we have in place to really help people along that journey. So they're 2 things we're rolling out this week, which I'm super excited about, because I think it'll just be it'll make us a lot more proactive and a bit more data driven and strategic in order to helping our people and helping leaders understand what they need to do next. So super excited to see how they land.
Yeah, I think having a mechanism for listening to people, obviously you can literally have conversations with people, but when you're spread across locations and different time zones, and just the team is growing, to be bigger, and making sure that everybody's voice has an opportunity to be heard, finding good ways of doing that, I think is so important in any business. So great to hear that there's ongoing good stuff happening at Trade Ledger. I had no doubt it would be. And so sort of final paired set of questions then. What's next for you, and where would you personally like to be in sort of 1, 3, 5 years time? And similarly for Trade Ledger, where do you see the business going? What's the sort of vision of success for the Trade Ledger as a company as well?
2 great questions. So I think for me personally, I don't know what looks next in terms of like roles and environments and organizations, but I think one thing I do know for sure is that I feel like I have some more scars to share. We have some great successes to share, and I would love to continue building that into my day-to-day, where I can connect with people, learn from what they've been through, but also share what we've been through. One big learning I think I had at the beginning of this is you read a lot about startups and what not to do, what to do online, and you can read all the blogs and articles of your heart's content, but there's nothing like sitting down with someone who has been through that roller coaster and saying, yes, the articles say do this, do not do that. And you're just sharing, and every environment's going to be really different, but that concept of just giving back to the community and also learning and connecting, I definitely want to weave that into whatever I do in or outside of Trade Ledger. I had a call with someone just last week. There was a team of 30 people and just going through their fundraising and wanted to grow. And they was like, we've got all these challenges we're never going to face. What did you do? And I was like, might not be perfect, might not work for you, but let me give you some, pointers and things to look out for. And that to me is just really rewarding. So that's something definitely I'd love to do more of.
You're gonna have an influx of people now.
I really hope so. But if it doesn't work out what I tell you, then not on my head. And yeah, Trade Ledger, there's no doubt Trade Ledger is going to continue to be successful. We are operating, we've got people across Sydney, London, Poland, looking at kind of US markets next. But we've just signed another new European client, which is great news for the business. And they want to continue helping every business out there to get access to the credit that they need and the capital that they need. That's what Trade Ledger is all about. They build a platform and technology that helps manage the B2B lending processes in large banks and makes it a more thorough process and unlocks that capital for small businesses that ordinarily might not have been able to get access to loan or the credit because of the very archaic processes in banks. So Trade Ledger will continue until the day that they know, every business of any size can get access to the capital they need when they need it most. And I have no doubt they'll continue to go and do that. And there's some really exciting things in the pipeline across different new banks that we're working with across different geographies. So it's an exciting time for Trade Ledger, and the product's really strong. The product market fit is great. They get some great client feedback. It's just kind of going through the different phases of the business that we've been through to make sure we stay aligned on that mission and can achieve it one day. So we'll continue doing great things in that space to try and meet their mission, no doubt. And just the beginning. I feel like it's just the beginning of Trade Ledger.
What's really nice listening to you share that is we've obviously known each other for a few years now, before all the tumultuous time at Trade Ledger, and I've actually never heard you speak so clearly and articulately about what the mission of Trade Ledger is, and that speaks volumes, I think, for the clarity that has come out of quite a tough time in the business. That's really, really lovely to hear. And thank you also for your offer of taking every call from any head of people out there in any growing business. I'll send them your way.
Absolutely, do it. A pleasure to meet everyone.
Thank you so much, Laura. I really loved this conversation.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you, Bea.
In next month's episode, I'll be talking to Daniel Illis, VP of People at Vinted. Daniel joined Vinted when they were already 400 people, and in the past 2 years has overseen their growth to 1,500 people. His story juxtaposes nicely with Laura's. Between the two narratives, we can start to appreciate when, in a company's growth journey, it makes sense to focus on management and leadership capability, and when we need to start taking processes and systems more seriously. There's no hard and fast rule, but there's definitely lessons to be learned from both Daniel and Laura's experiences. If you want to chat about any of the ideas that Laura and I have discussed in this episode, or you'd like to have a conversation about the people and culture, opportunities and challenges in your company, then please connect with me on LinkedIn or send an email to b.heller@thepioneers.co.uk.